Hi, everyone. Hello, Dario.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, we are kickstarting this month's debriefing session. I see people are joining. We are right on time, so we can give a couple of more minutes to the people who have signed up to indeed register into the webinar. Today's topic is quite a hot one, as it is one of the most typed, clicked, written about in today's media, which is exactly AI and specifically Gen AI. And with today's session, we would like to make a bit of clarity also on what's fact and what's fiction, and also be unbiased and data-based on its evolution within healthcare, in this case, within digital health. As the data we're going to share today are based on our latest report that our team has released just last week, actually. Feel free to download the report. There's a full version, the premium version, what we call the premium version, with lots of details on the evolution of the landscape of Gen AI for paying customers. And there is a high level, a more executive summary of that report for our basic users and our basic customers. As it is usual, I'm joined by my Chief Research Officer, Dr. Dario Heyman, who is kind and patient to be sharing with us the insights from the report. Today's conversation is going to be around definitions and also a deep dive focus on APAC, what's happening when it comes to funding, when it comes to specific digital health clusters. Is there any specific trend that has been observed when it comes to therapeutic areas, so on and so forth? All this information Dario is going to share with us in a second. We are using Zoom, so nobody needs me to remind that you need to use the Q&A function to post your questions, so that we can read them loud and answer your curiosities and again, request for more information. If today we are not going to answer everything, please feel free to drop us a message, email, LinkedIn, whatever. You have all our details. We are quite active into the platforms, so feel free to say hi, basically. Okay, I think, Dario, we can start.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Good.
I'm going to share my screen, and I think it would be appropriate to start with the definition, indeed, of what is Gen AI and why is so everybody talking about it.
Yeah, we probably need to roll back a bit on that, considering that talking about Gen AI, generative AI, using of large language models and artificial intelligence is always a very broad topic. Everyone claims that they know what they're doing. Everyone kind of says kind of what they really think about it and why they are now using Gen AI. And 2 years ago, they all say, well, we're all using AI. So it's literally always a buzzword. When we speak from a frame point of view, what generative AI is overall, it's basically a generative adversarial network, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, whereby you are generating fresh data or images or text or even music or whatsoever out of data that it has been trained on. There are two different models basically in place. You have the generator and you have the discriminator. Generally, when you're looking into a generator, it uses data that it creates out of a new data set. And therefore, it can be, for instance, fresh analysis of data that haven't been analyzed before. But when you use it as a discriminator, it generally evaluates a data set. So in a healthcare point of view, we really need to look into what are the two adoption fields, or what are the adoption fields for generative AI to be really used in. And this is why we are delving a bit deeper into that as well. It's like, how can we say that a certain venture is only using AI versus they're using Gen AI? And this is why we then need to make the discrimination then between that. Generally, when you're looking into generated data, so generator AI, it's basically data that is not really distinguishable from real data. whereby you're basically creating a data set that gets very real, even though it can be very fake as well, considering it's being based on models that have already existed out there. And you can easily also create new things. In case you guys are active on social media, you often see that faces are being generated out of nothing that doesn't really exist. This is basically this generative AI. But yeah, we are getting a bit deeper into that a bit later on, but that basically gives you a good understanding about what is Gen AI overall and how it's been used. What should be probably highlighted here, what I was referring to a bit earlier, is there's only 2% of ventures in digital health that are actually doing Gen AI, even though you may have seen significantly more within publications that they've been putting out there in the news channel or on LinkedIn. We really need to be very precise on who claims to do LLMs and large language models, and who actually doesn't, and it's basically just a normal AI. And we really took the time here and the team to look much deeper into that.
Yeah, on this specific topic, how are we from Health Tech Alpha perspective? As everybody knows, that's our proprietary platform that captures all the digital health data, all the evolution happening within digital health globally. So it's an amazing tool that everybody can use in different levels, of course, to understand more, to scout and to build their competitive intelligence. How are we specifically tracking within HTA Gen AI ventures?
So for those who've been following us for the past years, I generally try to refer to it a bit while we're having also these discussions. We use basically data aggregation. So we are tapping into basically every single website of every venture, everything that they've ever posted. It can be in a publication, can be in their regulatory approval, can be within their patent, within their patent submission, can be on their website, very deep buried within. We would find it. Generally, of what we are doing is we build a library around everything that has to do with Gen AI. So we are looking into things like generative pre-trained models as a keyword. We're looking into many other keywords that are referring to generative AI, and then we do a comparison and looking into which of these 16,000 ventures that we are now tracking almost are actually referring within their websites or within their news around anything within that field. And then we are looking much deeper into that and basically qualifying, is whatever they are claiming to do within actually what they're doing, or is this just a buzzword that they chopped up onto their first landing page so that it looks like a fancy new solution, even though it's the same thing that they've done 5 years ago. So we're qualifying that. And these data sets are then also being stored within HTA. So if ever anybody uses it, you will find against your keyword, you will find the ventures that are actually doing that as well. And we've qualified the data.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for specifying, especially what is indeed Gen AI and what is just PR for marketing purposes. Let me change slide and share a bit more on what are some of the examples within Gen AI and what's their impact specifically in the healthcare industry.
Yeah. So as I was earlier referring to, so we only have about 2% out of the 39% of ventures that are actually doing Gen AI. So taking 14,000 ventures as a benchmark and basically taking 39%, that's around 5,500. When you take these 5,500 and you're looking into 2% out of this, you are basically down to about 100, which is not so many, taking the entire ecosystem. Indeed. So you can basically cherry pick whichever venture looks very fancy and people have heard of before. Considering that we are here in Asia, let me focus a bit on Insilico Medicine, Hong Kong-based company, very much expanded also over the years, very active in the US now as well. It's basically looking into how can you use large language models to help identify new drug targets and therefore design new drugs? There's been actually a bit of controversy in the past 2 weeks around it, basically saying that the first drug that was created by an AI failed FDA approval. It's also quite fun to actually look into it. So in silico medicine worked exactly in the same field. Which can be good or bad, however people want to see it. But they're basically using lots of data that have been created over the lifetime of the generation of drug molecules and are training the model to fit into a certain structure and therefore have an effect, either a knock-on or a knock-off effect on the small molecule that they try to bind it into a protein. This is exactly what they're doing. So whether you want to now say that this is large language model, is it much different from what they've done 3-4 years ago? Likely not, but it specifies, it generates something new. And therefore, this sort of solution can be worked within this LLM Gen AI model, considering it's really generating something new. So this one qualifies quite nicely. Atomwise works in a very similar space, which is more, but here it's more on the diagnosis and treatment side of it. So here it's basically for the diagnosis purpose of skin cancer. Again, you train your model on a large data set on images on skin cancer. And therefore you can start predicting based on whichever other image comes in, does this qualify as being a cancer now? What we always need to be careful with these diagnosis treatment platforms or more diagnosis platforms is actually that none of them really has an FDA or any regulatory approval. So can be used, they're quite precise, but they are not used for diagnosis purpose. So you can't claim your medication against that. You always need to qualify this actually with a physician. So this is still the limitation that we have.
Yeah. That's very important, considering that we can talk a bit more also on the clinical proofs and the clinical evidence indeed of these solutions. We can show some data later on. I wanted to continue a bit the overall conversation on again, we're talking about digital health ventures, right? And we are expecting maybe that these ventures, considering that they are tech-based, create their own Gen AI. But what we've noticed, indeed, that's not the case in this scenario.
Yeah.
We have, okay, it's not in, okay, yeah, go ahead.
So we always need to be very detailed on when we speak about digital health meets proper tech, right? The thing is, digital health venture is very good for doing health. They shouldn't necessarily be good in building a model on large language models. So many of them are actually relying on the big tech players who have been very experienced in building tech and software or cloud software over the years to actually work within the field. So you wouldn't expect from this AI or from a Page who's very specialized on the diagnosis of certain diseases based on images, for instance. They should be they're very good at that. They may not be good in large language models. It's just not it's not their value proposition. So obviously these players need to work with someone who knows what they're doing. This is why it's no surprise that we see the likes of Microsoft and Amazon and Google up there. They are really at the forefront of it. OpenAI also very active. It's still a very new company, but since they've emerged out of this within this entire ecosystem, this is the reason why they're also so active, and it's literally the only value proposition that they bring to market. We do see also NVIDIA being extremely active within the space. NVIDIA is very known for working in that field. They're providing the chips behind powering it up. Therefore, they have lots of cash to burn also to see how solutions can be adopted within their own ecosystem. And we will see that moving forward as well. Snowflake is yet another player within the field as well, which is also not on the slide, but we also see lots of happening with it.
It's quite a recurring name indeed. Evolving a bit the conversation into risk, because also that is quite one important topic when implementing, when adopting indeed Gen AI. What can you share with us when it comes to the risks of such a technology within specifically healthcare? Let's not talk about governmental use of Gen AI, but
No, so I
Go
was
ahead.
alluding to it a bit earlier. Risk can be that your data set is still not correctly trained. So the data that you have, the raw data that you train your LLM on, is not of great quality. So therefore, the outcome that you're deriving out of it can be either skimmed towards a certain population group, can be skimmed towards a certain disease, can be skimmed towards I don't know what. So therefore, having data readily available and high quality should be your highest standard. If you're working on poor data, your outcome is going to be poor as well. This entire data ownership side is always a tricky one, and I won't really go too much into detail of that because everyone kind of claims that data is theirs. Ultimately, my point of view, data belongs to the person who it was generated from. So it should be the patient who owns their own data. This is a totally different conversation that we can have at some point on that.
Yeah, I think it is being developed also in other verticals, like for example, the royalties of artists and all the content that they have generated that is being used free, basically. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's entire biasness here, which I was alluding to earlier. If your data quality is rather low, you can be skimmed towards. So your data set is biased if your data set is poor overall. And then this entire patient privacy and security kind of goes a bit hand in hand also with the data ownership. It's like, do I really want that OpenAI crowds through all my data that I have within my phone?
Yeah.
Like, so it can always be a risk. And also, if ever you get hacked on that front, there's lots of data that is being lost at the same time if data is centralized in one particular space. So therefore, this centralization of data might also be risky, considering that Gen AIs are becoming more powerful, and therefore the likelihood of a breach occurring based on Gen AI created security threat to it is extremely high as well. So there's lots of security or cybersecurity that needs to be developed against that.
Yeah, that's all true. And indeed, let me go ahead with sharing. And indeed, on these topics, a lot of the major governments, at least the advanced economies, are introducing new regulatory frameworks to indeed control and the production, let's say, the creation of the technology itself and its application. As a tech and a science person yourself, what's your opinion on these regulations?
Regulations are always good. Whether they're being followed is a totally different story. I personally think, and it's a personal opinion, the European Union goes a bit too far with the privacy regulations that they want to put in place. The US to me is a bit too light, so it kind of needs to sit somewhere in between. The UK obviously goes this nice approach, sitting in between to some extent. Again, whether it works or not is a totally different question to ask. China to me is always a tricky one, since we have it here as well. In China, generally everything is forbidden unless you have a regulation against that. So it's really an underwhelming market at the moment when it comes to innovation, considering that basically everything that you newly created hasn't existed before is illegal. So it's a very risk-averse approach, which in this case might not be the right way because the technology is evolving so fast.
True. That's very true. And specifically talking about China, we've noticed also with other areas within digital health of how the funding has been decreasing, and that dynamism of the innovation ecosystem has been slightly lost when it comes to China compared to the previous years, of course. Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Let's move a bit into Gen AI now applied to the specific verticals within healthcare. We have selected 3 macro groups, let's say, within healthcare, and I want to understand from you where, let's say, these Gen AI digital health solutions are more widely being adopted.
Yeah. So obviously, at first, we need to look into what is Gen AI again being used for. What I was alluding to earlier, Gen AI is generally a very dynamic technology. Wouldn't even call it as a solution; it's a technology that can be applied across every single sector. As soon as you have lots of data available, you can apply a large language model on it. What we currently see is that it's being used particularly across the drug discovery pathway side. Again, there's no real therapeutic area against that. Can be used for diagnosis purpose. That's extremely versatile, but what we're currently seeing is for oncology or chronic disease management, mental health, again, which is generally the three that are very attractive to investors as well. It's generally the three therapeutic areas that are attracting the most funding overall. And then in the entire care delivery, care management, this is also where we see a lot of happening. Again, not a therapeutic area. So I wouldn't necessarily put it down or boil it down to being across particular therapeutic areas, more towards certain groups of users, where this slide is actually quite nice than to see. There's lots of adoption in the health system side, especially in the United States. Reason is care delivery is extremely expensive globally. It's the most expensive in the US, and therefore we see lots of adoption there. We see that State Synergy is launching services within the space, within the accelerator. We see that Mayo Clinic is doing a similar approach. We see that Mass General Hospital is having a similar approach. Most of the large health systems are adopting or are partnering with ventures within that space to make the care delivery pathway more streamlined. But they also work on the medical imaging point of view.
Basically, for increased efficiency and to cut costs, basically, you're saying.
Exactly. However, in this slide, what we do need to justify is that this is just AI partnerships. This is not generally Gen AI partnerships. So having these 3,900 partnerships over the past few years doesn't say that this is just Gen AI. We only have 110, 120 Gen AI startups that wouldn't close so many partnerships in such a short time, obviously. But when we look into AI overall, we do see that there's lots of partnerships happening within the health management solution side, which indeed is then for the health systems in particular, then followed here by medical diagnostics, again, where also Gen AI is extremely active with it.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Dario. Let's continue conversation on a topic that you mentioned before. That is exactly the proof points of how mature these Gen AI ventures are. Let me gather the specific slide that develops indeed the proof points and how that is distributed. Okay, here it is. And I can let you comment over, because as you know, in Galen Growth, we have our definition of clinical evidence, right? That encompasses different KPIs, and here we are showcasing a bit the distribution of these KPIs within generative AI ventures.
Yeah. Okay. So again, just to roll one step backwards, we built this evidence signal last year, basically as a response to the market looking for validation of services if they want to partner with that. Most of our clients are coming to us and say, hey, we've been approached by these, let's call it 10 startups that are all doing the exact same thing. With whom shall we now actually work with? More on a scientific point of view, where does it make the most sense? Now, you can go very early. However, your risk is extremely high when you partner with them. You can be very late, but then the partnership might be extremely expensive, considering that they're already very established. So you try to shoot somewhere in the middle. Generally, it depends on your risk appetite from a
profile,
from a large company point of view. So we developed this evidence signal to basically set a benchmark is based on every scientific data point that exists about a venture out there. How can you measure the scientific impact of a certain venture? So voila, we got this evidence signal out there. Generally, we are saying that a venture signal, an evidence signal higher than 40 says it's a very mature venture that has very high clinical evidence. As soon as you are above, you are safe to also partner with them. Now, when we look into the Gen AI startups versus all AI startups here, we're seeing that particularly on the peer-reviewed publication point of view, they're generally more prone to publish more. considering that they need adoption in some extent. So publishing your results out there is generally a good value proposition to the market to present that my data is reliable and you can trust me on what I'm doing. The peer reviewed is extremely important here because you can kick out lots of publications which you pay to play. It doesn't mean that they are peer reviewed, so you don't necessarily need to trust them. Secondly, is being used within clinical trials. Again, it's a very early stage still of Gen AI startups, so we won't see as much regulatory filings yet, considering the FDA just started. The FDA, for instance, just started to implement guidelines for generative AI for FDA approval, so we won't see much. So most of these 30% that you see here are likely ex-AI startups that have been moved into the Gen AI space, so their approval might have been prior to them moving into the LLM space overall. But overall, we see that Gen AI startups are significantly more active on the evidence side than normal AI startups, which is not a surprise, to be honest.
Definitely, yeah. Also, considering what we shared before on the regulatory framework just being drafted, basically. So it's going to take a bit of time for these solutions to indeed pick up and become mainstream. Leaving aside, so it's changing a bit let's say the gear of the conversation and focusing a bit on the funding and the landscape and where the money is going. I would like to ask you what's happening in APAC, because we are based in Singapore. We study the regional landscape, and I would like you to share a bit more of data on where indeed is the money flowing, and is there a difference between APAC and the rest of the world? So again, let me stop sharing this slide and find the right one. We have changed these presentations.
So I can already start a bit. Basically talking about
let
it.
Me take this one.
As you all know and you all read, funding has been dropping over the past few months or in this year overall. We've seen a significant funding drought, considering that investors are becoming more risk averse, which is the result out of their LPs becoming very risk averse or investing their money into more traditional ways of how you can increase your wealth. Now with interest rates being up, obviously parking your money in a bank might be more appropriate than putting it into risk investment. And therefore we do see that the mindset of the investors is also changing and moving more towards this is actually revenue generating, or am I just burning through my cash and raise my next funding round? We are no longer in the wild west as we've been back in 2019, 2020. So things have changed. Overall, when we look into North America here, for instance, we have a huge amount of ventures that are actually using AI, and only a small proportion of these AI ventures are actually using Gen AI. Overall, it's still the largest market for there's a reason behind that. Investors are still have a higher risk appetite as compared to any other part of the world. The number that surprised me a bit, which is based on the EU regulations that we are now seeing being implemented, that Europe is actually an extremely interesting market to be one in at the moment. However, this is also hugely different by the UK, which again has a totally different regulatory framework as compared to the European Union. So again, it's a bit more open, put it that way. We do not see as much activity in Asia Pacific as we are seeing in these other two large regions. Generally, for those who are not following us every single month, APAC is still the second largest ecosystem in front of the EU. The US is always the largest ecosystem. We speak about 5,500 ventures out there, so it's quite a massive ecosystem. Generally, APAC is significantly stronger. Now, not only by number of ventures working within that space, also by the amount of funding that is floating into LLM or Gen AI ventures, Europe exceeded APAC, which is quite a surprise. Generally, it was always
indeed.
Indeed. And this is largely driven by the fact that China is so against it overall. So we don't see much investment in northern Asia, Central Northern Asia, East Asia, whatever we want to call it here. And therefore, we see significantly less funding floating in there. And then you have lots of investors also in this part, Southeast Asia, which again don't have the same risk appetite as in the US, for instance, and therefore not even Southeast Asia can drive it. Australia, we do see a bit of activity. South Asia, we see even less activity. Even India, that is a very strong market for digital innovation in healthcare, it's extremely low in adoption, considering that it doesn't serve the purpose for the country at this point. It's more towards raising awareness, bringing healthcare to the patient, not so much about diagnosis support, care management support, etc. It doesn't exist. There's just no need for that. I've spoken to a venture from Singapore the other day that is very active within the space. They're also moving now to the US, considering the market is significantly bigger there for them. So it just makes more sense there.
Definitely, definitely. What do you think will the future look like for? I mean, how do you think this outlook, this current outlook of the regions will evolve?
Generally, regulation is important. Once you have guidelines set by the government, you have your operating space in which you can operate. Now, because of the adoption that we see within, like the regulatory adoption that we see within, for instance, China, it's extremely counterproductive because you are limping development of new solutions that are coming out. Once we have an established regulatory framework, which will take a few years again, we will start seeing that ventures start adopting to what we are seeing against the guidelines out there. They start testing boundaries. And this will literally, again, help accelerate the market adoption of there. The more supportive these solutions also become, so adoption from a physician, adoption from the patient, adoption from the corporate side, the more we see these innovations evolve even further. But it will take time for adoption to happen. Yeah. And if there's no clear regulation, no clear guideline in place, it's always very difficult to see it. But since we do see movement within the space, largely driven by everyone is just scared of it at the moment. So it can move quite quickly, also from a regulatory point of view.
Fantastic, thank you for that, Dario. Now, I don't think there is much. I mean, there is a lot to share because the other sections of the presentation and the report are deep dives into the specific verticals within healthcare, but we are not going to touch them in this presentation. So for anyone who is interested, please feel free to reach out to us to understand more on Gen AI into health systems, insurance, and biopharma. So what's the development in these three major healthcare verticals? I think we can open for questions to the audience, if there is any curiosities at least. Otherwise, we are past half the hour, so I think we will need to close them at some point. Of course, keep in mind that the session is recorded and will be published in our platform, so that also the people who didn't have the chance to join today can still listen to the recording of the session. Any questions from the audience? Go ahead.
One more thing from my end. For those who have already downloaded the report as well, we always launch a hub page against it within HTA. So if you are a user from Health Tech IFR, you will find a link within that basically brings you forward, that lists every single venture that also operates within the Gen AI space. And you can then also easily filter down by, okay, I'm looking for the ones that are active within the oncology space, and then you can find that and really dive into how are they working with whom are they working, and then you can kind of understand a bit more about the adoption of that. So yeah, just a little side note.
Fantastic. Okay, then I know I'm quite aware that the information is quite a lot to digest, so please take your time, and yeah, you can find us. Oops. Sorry, it's already mentioned earlier, but I wanted to know what factors cause the low number of Gen AI tool adoption in Africa and Southeast Asia. Fantastic.
Africa is always an interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay, so we generally need to look by the ecosystem and what solutions do we actually try to cover off. Now, when we look into Asia overall, it's a very fragmented ecosystem. Every ecosystem has their own distinct problems, let's put it that way. Northeast Asia, so taking Taiwan, Hong Kong to some extent, Japan, Korea as in one cluster, has a totally different problem set to solve as compared to Southeast Asia, ex Singapore, what I generally say. Most Southeast Asian countries are generally looking for, how do I bring the patient closer to a physician? How do I raise awareness around who is sick? How do I bring a medication faster to the patient in the end? None of this necessarily requires any generative AI tool. All what you need is easy transportation, maybe telemedicine, and a prescription fulfillment platform. Again, none of this really requires Gen AI. Africa is a very similar ecosystem to the frontier developing markets across Southeast Asia. Yet they are very different. But again, the huge distance between physician and patient is the same issue that we have. And therefore, solutions that are currently targeted by Gen AI, diagnosis support, drug discovery, and more streamlined hospital development is not a problem to be solved within these regions. Therefore, we see very low adoption or even incorporation of these ventures within the markets, just because it does not respond to the market need for the time being. It may look different in a few years from now, but at this point, there's just no need. If you would scale a solution in these markets, you likely need to expand it into a different region where your solution responds to.
Yeah, and also from an economic perspective, it's not yet that lucrative here in this region compared to, as you exactly said, in the US or Europe, where there is much more money invested in such solution. So it's a bit also the structure of the market, and indeed the needs, the pain points of the region that drive a bit, the adoption of such a solution. With Africa, for example, Dario, you can spend a bit of more words on Africa. Again, it's a very nascent digital health ecosystem as a whole, right?
I can, but okay. So yeah, it's a very nascent ecosystem. Most of the solutions that we see is very telemedicine driven at the time being. There are a few very innovative solutions coming out of either Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. The rest of the countries is literally, how do I raise awareness around healthcare and how do I deliver medication more effectively? This is why one of those drone startups went to Tanzania, etc., in order to ship medication via drones. This is the biggest pain point there. So there's just no need to make diagnosis more efficient.
Correct. I mean, all this, not to say that there is no potential.
No,
exactly. Yeah, exactly the contrary
honestly,
of that. There's
it's a great ecosystem. It's a great ecosystem with lots of growth, momentum.
Yeah.
We do see lots of activity also from a pharma point of view within the markets, considering it's data that hasn't been captured before. It's just still on an economic scale, very underscaled. Therefore, there's less interest, let's put it that way, for such solutions. Plus, the purchasing power is much lower.
Cool. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah, I think we've run out of time, Dario.
Appreciate you all
thank you so much for
us.
sharing your insights. Thank you everyone for joining today. You will receive the recording. The report has been published, so feel free to download or reach us to either me or Dario for further questions or curiosities. Again, thank you for following us, and talk soon again.
Sayonara.
Bye. Bye, Dario.